بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Continuing in our reading of the book حلية طالب العلم, the etiquette of the seeker of knowledge by Shaykh Bakr Abu Zaid rahimahullah. We entered the last session in the discussion about how does someone go about seeking knowledge, what books, what materials should they be studying, memorizing. So the Shaykh in the book here, this is chapter 2 on page 37, he begins discussing now the curriculum for the student of knowledge. And it's important to mention in the beginning that the ulama, they differ what books to begin with. So each scholar, they have their own type of recommendations. Many books they agree upon, some they differ. So we will mention what the Shaykh mentions and then some alternatives that the ulama also mention. And it's important that the brothers, they pay attention to these series of work, because if you want to learn, you have to take the correct path. It's not correct that a student wants to study and he studies in his own fashion, because number one, it makes the path to learning further and longer. And the second, it's no guarantee he will achieve his maqsood, his intent. For the ulama are the one telling us what to study at the beginning, intermediate and advanced level. So if you follow this path, you will inshallah gain knowledge the same way that they have Allah's permission. So Shaykh, he begins by mentioning, as for studying two subjects or more simultaneously, then this differs from one seeker to another depending upon their capacity and of understanding and enthusiasm. I mean, some of the ulama, they discourage some people to study more than one subject at one time. And others, they say if someone can, that he can study multiple subjects. Means he has one dars in nahu, one dars in tajweed, one aqidah, fiqh, like this. And then he reviews for all of them and he continues. Whereas others will say you study one subject until you complete the text and then you move to the next. So you decide what's easier for you and what's more suitable for your level. And sometimes some subjects, if you study them together, you may mix them up. So if it's like this, it's better to study one by one. And there are some students who can study multiple subjects at once, and each of them they separate. So they mentioned, for example, Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah in his biography, he was studying 12 lessons a day and then reviewing the 12 lessons at night. And so in a short period of time became alim. So not everyone is at this level where they can do this full day of study and then full night to review and then again. So it's best to take things easy, but if you're not able to, then you take only one subject. Then he says there were amongst the people of knowledge those who taught Hanbali fiqh. And because the Shaykh from Saudiya and the madhab that is the predominant is the Hanbali madhab, he recommends and he advises in regards to that the Hanbali texts from fiqh are read and studied. So he says, for example, Zaid al-Mustaqni' for the beginners, and then al-Muqni' for the differences of opinion within the madhab, and then al-Mughni for differences of opinion, means in general and at advanced level. And they do not permit the first level student to sit in the second level, nor the second in the higher level. Means there are levels, maratib al-ilm, and circles where the beginners, intermediate and advanced. So in fiqh, for example, Zaid al-Mustaqni' was for the beginner, and then the higher level, means intermediate level, they will be studying al-Muqni', and then later, those who reach the advanced, al-Mughni. And for those of us who are aware of the text, al-Mughni, it's an encyclopedia of the fiqh of the Hanbali madhab and all of the madhab of the ulama, comparative fiqh. So the benefit is taking that one level at one. If you're at beginner level, you don't go to the second. You have to stay in your level until you're advanced to go to the next level. And so for those reasons, if you remember this, you will remember that every dars is not open to every student. And if you find yourself that certain lesson is higher than your level, then you go to the one below it. There's no shame in that. As someone who studies the muqaddimat, the introductory or madkhal or introduction to a subject before he's studying it. And in fact, he advised that everybody, he does this before getting into some of the bigger books. And Shaykh will mention all of them now. And we would recommend that all of the introductory books, you try to at least have some foundation. Otherwise, you'll study the book and you have to maybe repeat the lesson, repeat the book, because you have no foundation. So he said the ulama would divide, or the mashayikh would divide this lesson into 3 stages. So to have three groups: beginners, intermediate, and advanced. And so this is important. This is generally how the ulama were divided. So you have mubtadi'een, beginners, then mutawassit, the one in the intermediate level, then the mutamakkin, the one who's advanced. And so for us, we study, and the lesson that the brothers were teaching were always in the beginning level. It's for everybody. And slowly in that lesson, on that subject, you go to the next one and the next one. So it's important that every subject, you start with the beginning. If you jump, you will fail in achieving your intent. And it's important to be patient. Because sometimes you read these books and the names, and you say, well, I'm just going to start from there. And what happens when you open the book and you read, you say, I don't understand. So he says, now begins the Shaykh with the lessons or the subjects in the books. So the brothers advise that they write this down. Some of them we've already covered, means we mentioned them during our study of the book Minhajiyya Talib Al-Ilm by Shaykh Zaid rahimahullah. We mentioned all the different subjects and all the books you should be studying. And I believe on the website as well, there's a list of all the beginner books and their explanations. But nonetheless, Shaykh Bakr rahimahullah is going to give us his list. So for Tawheed, somebody he begins with Usul al-Thalatha, or Thalatha Usul. It's the first one you begin with. Then Qawa'id al-Arba', the four fundamental principles. Then Kashf Shubahat, which means the removal of doubts. And then Kitab al-Tawheed. All of them written by the same author, Shaykh al-Islam, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. Now if you read this, you see that there are some differences in tartib. He mentions Thalathat Usul as the first, and then Qawa'id al-Arba', then Kashf Shubahat, then Kitab al-Tawheed. Now some of us, when we study, we begin with before that. And it's advisable. We begin maybe with Nawaqid al-Islam. Alhamdulillah, we studied with the brothers. It was recorded, the lessons we studied. And other brothers have taught, and we've gone through more than once, those subjects. But you start with that one, it's advisable because it's easier. So if someone did this, it's no problem. But if you study Nawaqid al-Islam, it's probably easier to begin with. And for those of us who have that small book, Mutun Talib Al-Ilm, the yellow cover or the app, you see it begins there. The nullifiers of Islam, 10. Maybe 2 pages text. You memorize it, and then you read the explanation, or you sit in the lesson of the teacher and you understand it. So Shaykh, he mentioned Thalath al-Usul, then Qawa'id al-Arba'. Others, they mention Nawaqid al-Islam, then Qawa'id al-Arba', then Thalath al-Usul. So there's differences. Now it's not wrong one over the other, but as a beginner, it's probably easier to begin with the shorter text and the longer ones, because he gives you encouragement. And that's why Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, from his ahadith, when it comes to ta'aleem, allimu wa yassiru. He said, teach and make it easy. And so in there, in the sharh of this hadith, Ibn Hajar, he mentions fa'idah, that if someone, he begins something easy when he's studying, and little bit, encourages him to grow in his knowledge to go to the next level. Because you start with something easy, it's easy to finish. You see it's only very less. You begin motivated. I can memorize this. I can memorize this. I can understand this. And then you go to the next one. You feel motivated. But if you begin maybe with Thalath al-Usul as a hifz, it's long compared to the other two. So you may get discouraged. And you wouldn't finish either of them. It means you didn't finish Thalath al-Usul, but no Qawa'id al-Arba'. And from experience you find that many of us who began maybe there, we find that this is the hardest step was to finish it. But if you began with Nawaqid, you feel very confident. And the Masaid in there also leads you to there. It's very important that I would advise that we begin with easier and smaller text. There's no shame. All of it is ilm. All of it is ilm, is important. Then the Shaykh says, Kashf Shubahat, then Kitab al-Tawheed. The ulama, they differ which one comes first. Some Shaykh, they say you do Kitab al-Tawheed, then Kashf Shubahat. Because Kashf Shubahat is doubts, exposing and refuting the doubts of the people of shirk. So if you have Kitab al-Tawheed, you know Tawheed, then you know how to expose it and the doubts. So Shaykh Salih al-Shaykh in his Muqaddimah of his Kitab al-Tawheed or Kashf Shubahat, he says you do Kitab al-Tawheed first. Because if you do Kashf Shubahat, it's more difficult and it needs more time. Whereas the Shaykh mentions here the other way around. Either way, they're all in Tawheed. So this is the Tawheed section. Now some may ask, what's the difference between Tawheed and Aqeedah? Anyone knows? What's the difference between Tawheed and Aqeedah? Right? What Shaykh mentioned here, Tawheed, but we don't see the books of Aqeedah. Yeah? Good, so if we mention Tawheed, and we didn't mention Aqeedah, we can say they're all encompassing the same. But when it comes to a subject, Tawheed has its meanings. It means Tawheed is the subject of Tawheed, and Aqeedah is the other issues of creed. So Tawheed books, you separate it usually from the Aqeedah books, And where do you always begin is Tawheed. So for example, now the Shaykh will go to the Aqidah. So it's very important that brothers remember, when you study your Aqidah, start with the Tawheed. For the first da'wah, the Anbiya Rasul, da'wah to Tawheed. وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا. Allah says we sent to every messenger, every community a messenger, telling the people to proclaim أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. Worship Allah alone, Tawheed, and stay away from false deities. So Tawheed awalan. Always you begin with Tawheed. As for the Tawheed, Aqidah, before the Shaykh gets there, he puts Tawheed al-Asma'i wa Sifat. In reality, the books he mentioned here are both Tawheed and Aqidah. You might say the Tawheed Asma' wa Sifat, but they're also Aqidah. So he calls it Tawheed Asma'i wa Sifat, the books for Tawheed of Asma', Allah's names and attributes. The first of them, Al-Aqidah al-Wasatiyya. Al-Aqidah al-Wasatiyya. Alhamdulillah, our brother Fajr, he covered this book in its entirety. And so this book, Aqidah Wasatiyya, it is an Aqidah book, but the Shaykh calls it Tawheed Asma' wa Sifat because it covers more detailed Allah's names and attributes. So when it comes to Shaykh Sulaymaan Rahimahullah's book, Shaykh Sulaymaan Ibn Taymiyyah, the first one is Muhammad Abdul Wahhab, this is Ibn Taymiyyah. We have to know Ibn Taymiyyah, there's a way to read his books. It's important. Some Shaykh, we'll read from it later, some points. Shaykh Salih al-Shaykh, he has a book, Kayfa Taqra, how do you read the books of Shaykh Sulaymaan Ibn Taymiyyah? It's not just you pick up any book and read it. It has levels. So if you read it anyway, Ibn Taymiyyah, you'll get confused. So there's levels. So here's important, Wasatiyya. That's usually everybody's introduction to Ibn Taymiyyah is about Aqidah Wasatiyya. It's a book we hear often, but we should study it. Read it. If you're able to memorize it, but study it from beginning to end. And as a note, all these books the Shaykhs mentioned, they have the shuruhat, and you study them with the teacher. So the sharh is there, so you need to read them. If you're able to memorize, you memorize, but with the sharh. Means the explanation with you or the teacher explaining it. They are not designed just to memorize alone. So Al-Wasatiyya, then Al-Hamawiyya. Then Aqidah Al-Hamawiyya, often called Fatwa Al-Hamawiyya Kubra. They call it the Fatwa, the Hamawi major Fatwa, which is different than the Sughra, but then that's not the point here. Al-Hamawiyya, it's often referred to as. And lastly, At-Tadmuriyya. At-Tadmuriyya, all by Ibn Taymiyyah. And then you finish that, you go to Aqidah At-Tahawiyya. So now let's explain a little bit about these books, because some of us may not be familiar with these books and their names. And it's important to have always some basic knowledge about something before you study it, or at least you know where to look. So the first you mentioned Al-Wasatiyya, and for those of us who attended the lessons of Fajr, you know Al-Wasatiyya is a book written by Shaykh al-Islam Rahimahullah. When the Ahl Wasit, the people of Wasit, they wrote him a letter asking him to clarify the basic creed of the people of Sunnah. Ahl Sunnah al-Jama'ah, what do they believe? So he wrote them between Dhuhr and Asr, Aqidah Wasatiyya. Small in size, great in benefit. So Wasatiyya covers the Aqidah A to Z in a summarized form, but more in Asma' wa Sifat, in the general principles. Now if somebody wants to know more about Allah's names and attributes, there are specialized books. But as introduction to all of the Aqidah, and with this, you read Al-Wasatiyya. And Al-Wasatiyya is easy to understand because majority, if not all of it, قال الله وقال رسول. Hadith, ayah, many ayat, many hadith. So it's called Wasatiyya because Ahl Wasit, they asked him this question. As for Al-Hamawiyya, if you were to guess, the same. Ahl Hama, they asked him a question, this time more detailed, about Asma' wa Sifat. In particular about Allah's Al-Istiwa, and how we understand this, and how we understand these adillah, and then some response to the doubts. And they asked the Shaykh to be detailed. So that's why Fatwa Al-Hamawiyya Kubra is very long. And it has a small version, a bigger version, where the Shaykh added more. And it's more detailed. Then the last, At-Tadmuriyya, and Tadmur, they asked Shaykh al-Islam Rahimahullah about the qawa'id of Allah, Allah's names and attributes, and also principles in relation to Qadr and Qada. So At-Tadmuriyya is more difficult because he lays qawa'id, principles everyone should know. And if you know these principles, you can study them in the more advanced books of Aqidah. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to. Now the ulama differ which one comes first. Some of the Shaykh mention Tadmuriyya, then Hamawiyya. Some say Hamawiyya, then Tadmuriyya. So the benefit we take from this is that Shaykh Salih al-Shaykh in his book, How Do We Study? This book, How Do We Study the book of Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah, he says it's the following. Here the maratib. First, Al-Wasatiyya. Here, Awla, or Awla, afwan. So first, ثم حموية, ثم تدمرية. In this order. You got Wasatiyya, then Hamawiyya, and then Tadmuriyya. And if anyone reads through the book, so you come to them, you realize that the difference between the three is significant. Tadmuriyya is smaller, very small in size, comparatively, but very detailed. Where Hamawiyya is longer, but it also has more evidences. Each one, Shaykh al-Islam, he divides according to the level. Because the first one, they asked him generally, tell us about Aqeedah, he wrote this. The second one, they asked specific question about Allah's rising above the throne and how do we understand this versus the other evidences or doubts. So he gave him, and they said be detailed, so he was detailed. And the last one is really detailed. So if someone he reads in this order, it's easy for him. Even then, someone may find difficulty. So the ulama have also done some summaries of all of them. And probably the best of those you find is Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah. Now Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, he has sharh of all of these books. But he also has taqribat, introductory or summarization for all of them. For Al-Wasatiyya has a mudakkira. It's called the mudakkira or the course kit or the summary of Al-Wasatiyya. It's written for students at the secondary level in the Ma'had Ilmi, where he just summarized Wasatiyya for the beginner. So if you read that one, then you read Wasatiyya, you really understand it. Because the beginning is very simple, just basic principles. But then when you read his other explanation of Wasatiyya in the 2 volumes, very long. And to many of us, when you find it in English, Wasatiyya is the Sharh Ibn Uthaymeen, it's in English. But maybe the 2 volumes is too long for us. So if you do the Mudakkira, at least you have something, then you go to this. As for Hamawiyya, he summarized it in a summary, Fathul Bariyya is called. And this summary is just a tarkhis of the whole of Hamawiyya. Because Hamawiyya, some of the ulama, they explain just the beginning, some explain the whole book, some they do, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen did a summary. But what's unique about Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, he explains not only, he summarizes it, he even explains his own summary. So now these books are all available. So you have his summary, it's in English, then his explanation of the summary even. So you see this inayah, he has concern for Aqeedah and Tawheed, which helps the student a lot. Because when you read the sharh, you listen to it, you say, subhanAllah, how easy now the book is compared to when you read it alone. And then for Tadmuriyya, he has Taqreeb Tadmuriyya, which is on the way to understanding or towards understanding Tadmuriyya. And then he has a sharh on that. And then he has, he leaves it like this. And other ulama, they explain Tadmuriyya in its entirety. So for Ibn Taymiyyah, there's a way to read his books. This order is advisable. Some mashayikh, you see that they go the other way. They, like Shaykh mentions, as Shaykh Zaid mentions here, you do Tadmuriyya, then Hamawiyya. Either way, if somebody, he does one over the other, whatever is easier for them. When you finish all these books, you read then Aqeedah Tahawiyya. Tahawiyya is considered from the Jawami'. This is considered from the comprehensive books of Aqeedah. In Aqeedah, there are books that are summarized, Mujmal, and some of them are Mufassal. It's important. In Aqeedah books, we have 2 types. Summarized Aqeedah and specific Aqeedah. Means detailed. Tahawiyya by far is considered one of the most classical texts of Aqeedah. In fact, all the different tawa'if of the Muslim community, the different sects, even they agree to this book. Despite some minor errors, the book is considered a classic in Aqeedah to be memorized and to be understood and studied. Now this book is advanced because it covers all the Aqeedah written by Imam al-Tahawi, rahimahullah, Abu Ja'far. But what people they don't understand is that the sharh of it, Allah Shaykh with his explanation, is a different league altogether. It means the sharh of Tahawiyya by Ibn Abdul Hanafi, the one we studied his poem on Sirah, that is considered a very advanced book. So in that book he explains the whole Aqeedah and he brings everything that you need to know, from the refutation of the people of innovation, to for people of Kalam, to the Aqeedah, to everything. So if someone reads it, and interesting enough, it books even in English, sharh of it, you will see that this book is for the advanced level. So in between Wasatiyya, Hamawiyya, Tadmuriyya, somebody may study different books of Aqeedah. Examples like we covered ourselves in our lessons here, and you'll notice the lessons that their brothers they teach here, all of them they're in these levels. Each one of them they're going through the levels, and that's why some of the names, alhamdulillah, we're familiar with. And this is important because even ourselves, we pick the books that are benefit for everybody. So somebody may study in between these other smaller books, Lum'atul Etiquette, Ibn Qudama, for example, or some may read something else, or some contemporary ulama, for example, Shaykh Uthaymeen, or Aqeedah Sahiha, Shaykh Ibn Baz, or any of these books, or books by Fawzan, any book in between that, just to help you to get to that more advanced books. So that Shaykh finishes that for the subject of At-Tawheed, Al-Asma' wa Sifat. As for Arabic language, then he mentions now, you begin with Al-Ajurrumiyyah. And here is an important benefit. What is he intending by this? Is Arabic grammar, Nahu. So if there's Arabic grammar, then there's morphology, Sarf. So Nahu and Sarf. And so here the Shaykh is talking about Nahu. But before that also is that somebody may also want to learn Arabic. So if somebody may want to learn some basic Arabic, there's books to learn that too, like the Medina series, Arabiya Bayni Yadayk, to teach you Arabic, just how to speak and read, write, or just to be able to know the vocabulary. But for Nahu, you begin like this. So he says first, you begin with Matan Ajurrumiyyah. Alhamdulillah, Abu Aisha is teaching the brothers this. And then Mulhid al-I'rab by Al-Hariri, which is a poem. Some ulama, they advise this, they recommend it, to memorize it. It may be difficult, so some they suggest you just move to Qatr al-Nada, Ibn Hisham, which is a more intermediate level Arabic text. Then some he finishes with Alfiya ibn Malik. Now of course the ulama, even with this, they differ. Some they mention that before you get to Ajurrumiyyah, there's Muqaddimat. You might want to do something, just some basic Arabic. Or some they mention, for example, some maybe do the poem version. Ubayd Rabbi, they call the poem version Ajurrumiyyah. There's different ways. But the person, if he goes through these levels, then he's going to, by the end, if he finishes or even does Alfiya ibn Malik, then with the explanation is considered then advanced level in Arabic Nahu. And so very important, you begin with this text. And Ajurrumiyyah, even if someone finds it difficult, he should never give up and study it. For somebody may study the beginning and say, I don't see the benefit in it. But it should be, you don't give up, you finish it. And that's a benefit as well, that if somebody is studying it, he should continue to study until he completes it. Because in the beginning, it's just maybe learning the first surface, but the second time, if he wants to repeat it, then he's going to find the fruits. But not to join the class and to drop out. Another benefit also is that sometimes somebody may be teaching a lesson, and the new students, they come. Shaykh Uthaymeen, he mentions in the Sharh here of this kitab, Haliyat Talib, that's an issue that arises when the lessons are going. And so he says that in the case, for example, if someone is studying or teaching Zaid Mustaqni', then new students come. And we pass Kitab al-Tahara. Should we go back? He said, no, we don't go back. And he actually mentioned some of his audios that we're at this level. If you want to join us, you join us here. Otherwise, you have to go to the lessons where they begin from the beginning. He said, otherwise it's dhulm, he said, for the Sabiqeen, those who came first, because we keep going back Tahara, and we never pass Tahara, because every day someone new is going to come. And the benefit we take from that is that if the lesson is going, if someone joins, he should know where the book is and where they are. And if he needs to get review, some of the students who were there will teach him what he missed. So it's a benefit as well that we can't tell the teacher where to teach and to start. Rather, you come to the lesson, you have to come to where it is. So when the lesson opens, it's your opportunity to start from the beginning. Then the Shaykh mentions the hadith. Where do we go for hadith? You begin with the 40 hadith Imam Nawawi, 40. Alhamdulillah, again was taught. Brother Al-Fajr, he taught it and finished it. And someone he chose to memorize these hadith. The 42, or if he does the 50 Ibn Rajab, memorizing it. Because these hadith, you realize you will need them a lot. You will remind yourselves of them. They will come a lot in your daily life and your understanding of the basics. And some Shaykh, they mention not to belittle books like this. Some say 40 is only 40. I need more hadith. Because you want to become muhaddith or you want to become big Shaykh. But 40 has a lot of fa'idah. But number one, usul al-deen, teaches the basics of the religion. And some of the qawa'id you find in them, in the explanation, you need. And so the benefit, if you skip over 40 or look down upon it, it's no guarantee you'll finish what's higher than it. But if you do 40, you understood it, you have a lot of knowledge. And to show you just how important that is, 40 with the Sharh, Ibn Rajab, Jami' Ulum al-Hikam, if you read the explanation, you find this book is actually marji', a reference. And when you read that book, even though it's 40 hadith explanation, how many masail fiqh, aqidah, ikhtilafat, things that when you read over them, tomorrow you go back and say, oh, I read Ibn Rajab, he mentioned this. And you go back to, and some Shaykh, even they're quoting it. In certain difficult issues, they go back to this 40 hadith explanation. Not an explanation of something bigger. So it's very important, the brothers, they don't look down upon it. Rather, you memorize it, review it. Some Shaykh, they even mention, like Shaykh Salah al-Shaykh, they should be reviewed monthly. Means when you finish reviewing it, you sit with the brothers, you just go over it. And you hadith number 1, 2, 3, you go over it, you finish it. So it's encouragement that if we're beginning with the hadith, if we haven't already memorized it, try to memorize it. Then Umdatul Ahkam by Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi, rahimahullah. And Umdah is also valued by the ulama. because of its shortness, means it relies upon the authenticity, Bukhari and Muslim mainly, some additions, yes, but also it has with it short ahadith. And some of them are longer, but it's a book to memorize. Now somebody may choose to go to Bulugh al-Maram. And some ulama, they mentioned this. Shaykh Uthaymin in Sharh says it's ahsan. It's better if you choose between the two, which one you want to do. If you do Bulugh al-Maram, hu ahsan. Because Bulugh al-Maram, yes, it's longer, but the hadith are shorter, but also more comprehensive. And also the mention of Umdat al-Ahkam, we're talking about Sughra, not the Kubra. For there is Umdat al-Ahkam Kubra, the bigger version. And it's also by Al-Maqdisi. We're not talking about that one, we're talking about the smaller one. So somebody has a choice. But Bulugh al-Maram, no doubt, this one someone should not look over. Bulugh al-Maram is Adilatu Ahkam. It's a hadith about the rulings. So for example, in the lesson Brother Majid is teaching, when we're learning about fiqh and the qawa'id and the basics, in Umdat al-Ahkam, a lot of the hadith are there. So the qawa'id, you stay in your mind, you memorize them, and you're always handy. Sujood Sahw and Hajj. So to memorize it is very important. Added benefit also, Ibn Hajar indicated which are weak and which are strong in general. And some hadith he didn't comment, but there are tahqiqat, verification. So you check which one's authentic, which is not. No doubt, Umdat al-Ahkam, if you did it or you did Bulugh, alright, you have a choice, but Bulugh no doubt is better, but it's longer. So someone who tries his best to memorize it. And then the Shaykh says then after Muntaqa by Al-Majd Ibn Taymiyyah's grandfather, Muntaqa al-Akhbar, which is much longer. And obviously, some ulama they advising, others they don't. It means after Bulugh you have enough ahadith ahkam, and you can move over to different books, compilations of hadith. As a benefit as well, the ahadith ahkam or hadith you should memorize with precision, with detail and precision, because those hadith you build ahkam on them. Whereas the hadith al-fada'il, some ulama say if you're more general in memorization, means the meaning, it's not as dangerous. But if you memorize the hadith ahkam, must be detailed or exact, because you're building a ruling off it. So if you just memorize the hadith loosely, you may change the ruling. But hadith ahkam are important, wudu, salah. So if someone's memorizing hadith, arba'in gives you just the overall cover of the deen. Then when you do the book Bulugh al-Maram, now you know the ahkam for your daily life. So it's very important, and no one should belittle it. Some of the kibar ulama, you find this is one of the books that they will often cherish, like Shaykh Ibn Baz rahimahullah, that will often be seen reviewing this book and carrying it with him, despite the level of his knowledge. It means he's a Shaykh from our Shaykh, one of the ulama, Shaykh al-Islam, some refer to us, yet this is the book that he would often review and keep with. And so it's so important, the Bulugh al-Maram should be in our libraries. There is a translation in English, Arabic. So every day you try to cover it. If you finish Arba'in, for example, and you want to move from there to Umdah. And then the author finishes with the 6 books of hadith. After that you have free reign to read the 6 books of hadith and memorize them as you wish. Now some of the ulama also mentioned that you may do Lu'lu' wal Marjan in between, what's agreed upon by Bukhari and Muslim. And of course there is more detail. But it's very important. Arba'in should always be in the head of all of us to do Arba'in. And if you haven't done it, to be starting from today to memorize it and to review it and to study it. As for fiqh, inshallah we'll mention. He says, as for fiqh, then, before that, sciences of hadith. And so Mustalah al-Hadith, there are many books someone can study. And so he mentioned, the Shaykh, only 2 texts. So there are more than this. Number 1, Nukhbat al-Fikr by Ibn Hajar. And some ulama say it's the best introduction someone can really study. There's a poem version, and then there's a method by Ibn Hajar by itself. Someone he can choose to do. And there's more than one poem version, so he can pick whatever one he wishes, or just do the method itself with the sharh. And then he says Shaykh Al-Fiyah Al-Iraqi rahimahullah, which is of course 1,000 lines of poetry. So someone may say, well, in between that this is difficult. So there are books in between, or even before that. So someone may begin with Bayquniyah, alhamdulillah, was covered before. Explanation, Sharh al-Bayquniyah, 34 or so lines, try to memorize it. And then after that, someone he can go to something intermediate. So he could do Nukhbat al-Fikr, and then he could do Ikhtisar Ulum al-Hadith, and then he can go to different alfiyat like this. It's up to him. And there are books in between that. Some people say there's books even shorter than that, like Mustalah al-Hadith, Ibn Uthaymin. It's like a madkhal for someone who knows nothing about hadith. So we'd advise the brothers when it comes to the science of hadith that you pay attention to it. At least Bayquniyah, someone who studies it and memorizes it. It's very short, but you have to know it. Because Ahlul Hadith, you have to know hadith. It's very important when it comes to Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. We are people who take value and concern for the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But it can't be we don't know the science. Because in today's time you have people who come and they say there is no such thing as even a hadith. Some people have audacity to say there is no hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, only Quran. How do they say this? Because they have no knowledge about Usul al-Hadith. Absolutely no knowledge. Had they studied these basics, they'll come to realization it's a whole science. In fact, this science is one of the great sciences of Islam you won't find in any other religion. Science of men and narration, and authenticity, and all of this. Then the Shaykh mentions fiqh. As for fiqh, he says the etiquette of walking to salah. Adab Masjid Salah, I believe Abu Aisha went through this, Shaykh Ibn Abdul Qaadir. And this, there are books of fiqh, you may say there is fiqh. There are different ways to look at it. So here he's mentioned this because some of the ulama will teach this book because it teaches you about prayer. Al-Shurut al-Salah, or it teaches you etiquette, how to come to prayer, because every day you come to prayer, so you know how to walk to prayer, how to prepare for prayer. Some ulama say this book is designed for that. And you find some of the contemporary ulama explaining it. Others, they may say, you may go before that. Shaykh al-Islam has the Shurut al-Salah, the conditions of prayers and its adab. So no doubt, someone he picks something to do with his tahara and his salah. The most important for fiqh for the beginner is tahara and salah. So if it comes to studying this book, you may study this, but prior to this you may study something basic, like how to make wudu. If you don't study it practically, you also study also with theoretically. What are the hadith, what are the rules? Alhamdulillah, the lessons of fiqh are already covered. Then salah, he should know how to pray. Every Muslim needs to know how to pray, for you pray 5 times a day. So some ulama say this ilm, is the knowledge is wajib. You have to know how to pray, how to do wudu, have to. So it would not make much sense to be studying hadith and you don't know how to pray yet. Like your prayer is not according to sunnah. So for prayer, majority of ulama they recommend Sifat al-Salah, Imam al-Albani. Most of us we have in our houses. If its book is too long, too detailed, mukhtasar, you get to summarize, know how to pray properly. Because prayer is something which is not excusable. Someone doesn't know how to pray. On top of that, student knowledge. Means if someone's prayer is not correct, we say this is deficiency. Then the Shaykh mentioned Zaid al-Mustaqni', which is obviously for Hanbali fiqh. So Al-Hajjawi. And what's important is that this is where the ulama they differ. Some of them would advise a Shafi'i matan maybe. Some of them may advise a matan when it comes to Hanafi fiqh or Maliki fiqh. It's a different approach. Now there's no wrong way, because some of the people they may think, are we to even study the books of madahib? Some ulama say there is some value in it. Yes, there's an order and structure that you benefit from. Categorization which you can't do without. Or someone can opt out to do as we're doing with the brother Majid. The book about Imam Shawkani, rahimahullah. Turabahiyya itself is a matan based on fiqh, summarized for beginners. So the beginning, when it comes to fiqh, you study a matan. Now Ibn Uthaymin gives you now the example. So when it comes to Hanbali madhab, for example, there are levels. So the example he gives here, Zaid al-Mustaqni', then Umdat al-Fiqh, then Muqni', then Mughni. And in this you find that the levels are based on beginner, intermediate and advanced. So for our purposes, if someone wants to study Zaid al-Mustaqni', there is no shame in it, no wrongness in that. In fact, you find now in Medina University and other places, they're opting for this due to its simplicity and structure for the beginner. For not everyone is able to study maybe the other works. But these books which is a matan usually doesn't have much evidence in it. It's just the conclusions. So what the teacher does, he explains it and he gives you some of the adillah and some of the reasoning, the daleel and the ta'leel. Daleel is the evidence, ta'leel is the reasoning. Why would they say this? Then when you move to the next level, for example, Umdah, Ibn Uthaymin he says Muqni', some say Umdah. But if you go there, what happens? Now in the madhab you get 2 opinions. First you start with 1, the next level you get 2. Then you get the next level, you get in the same madhab. The next level 3, and then outside the madhab. So you see the benefit, at the beginning you're only learning 1 ruwayah. And that's something someone should know. The madhab is not always agreed upon. So 1 way, then 2, then 3, then they learn outside the madhab. So according to your understanding. Now if someone doesn't study this, then he studies his books, like we mentioned. He can go from the perspective of hadith, fiqh al-hadith. So he does Shawkani's work, or he studies fiqh from Umdah, and there's other ways of going about it. So this is important because some people may say that there's no benefit in studying madhab. But in fact, some ulama advise that for the beginner so that he has something structured. Because at the beginning, if he's just learning the hadith directly, he doesn't know. He doesn't know, for example, what does it mean tahir? What is mutahhir? What does that even mean? He's just reading hadith. So it's helpful that he does this. And some ulama even mentioned that if you memorize Zaid al-Mustaqni' and Bulugh, the sufficiency in excellence. As they mentioned a line of poetry, مَتِنٍ زَادٍ وَبُرُوغ كَافِيًا فِي النُّبُوغ. Means someone, if he memorizes and he studies زاد مستغني عن بلوغ, sufficiency and excellence. Means this person will be sufficed to become a genius or excellent in his studies. To that level they went. Even though you may argue that it's not sufficient, but some said that these two texts, someone memorized and understood it well, he's qualified to even to answer questions. That's to that level. And some may say, well, they're not very long texts. Subhanallah. With proper fahm. And then the Shaykh continues by mentioning them, the principles of fiqh. We'll mention that next week or the week after, inshallah. But we want to benefit here. These books we're mentioning, you write them down, and then to go by them one by one. The benefit of this list is not just to know it. You start like this. Because some may say, okay, now I know all the books to begin with, so now you have to continue now or begin to study them. Alhamdulillah, many of the lessons we said here in this masjid and different places in the city, we are studying them. So the brothers are encouraged to continue in talab, to go over. And you can quickly see what level we're all at. We're all going to the beginning. And no one should be shy of it. These books have been taught one by one in different subjects. So the person is gaining all of this benefit, he's actually gaining ilm. Because the end, when you finish all of the books, at the beginning level, then intermediate, then after you layer it upon advanced, you find yourself knowledgeable. But if someone comes and says, I will only study one subject, I will only study a little bit of one subject, how much more do we need? We need to have zeal and knowledge, but also patience. And we'll get to that later on. One of the qualities of student knowledge, sabr, patience, because you just realize all of this you have to study. And before you even consider like mubtadi, you're just a beginner still. But there's no shame and no harm because it's ibadah and it's drawing near to Allah, taqarrub ila Allah. We're doing all of this. You should be encouraged to do it. One last point I want to mention as well. Alhamdulillah, all of these books, or many of them have been already put into English. If someone's Arabic is not very good, so he can read the English along with the Arabic and continue. So some people say, I don't know Arabic, so I can't start learning. No excuse. If you don't know Arabic, you can read the books in translation. And when your Arabic improves, go to the Arabic. And how about then if someone says, I can't find anyone to teach me these books? With that we say then, if you can't find someone to teach you, then what do? You try to benefit from the tape recordings of those teachers available to you. And we'll get to later on with the ulama advice if someone has no teacher, no shaykh to teach him. So they don't say you sit there and you wait for the shaykh to come, or you wait till Allah gives you tawfiq to go to Haramain or Yemen or something. Some people they say this, but this is a loss. You get the tapes and you listen, you go. And with that you're actually in the search of knowledge. You're salik al-tariq, you're actually moving in the way of knowledge. And after a while you find yourself benefiting yourself, your family, your community. Wabillahi tawfiq, inshallah. We'll end with this. Anyone has any questions or something they want to add or to mention? Yeah.
Good advice for students to take a number of advices of what's meant in here, Talib. Some people have different advices.
So this is a good question. Should someone take many different approaches or advices when seeking knowledge? It's best to suffice himself with someone he trusts. So if he reads from one shaykh and says this is the way, follow that way. Because everyone has their own, as you said, every shaykh has his own advice. So you may get delayed. This one said this, someone else comes to know this book, and then you go, and at the end you're wasting time. So you see the ulama, alhamdulillah, they agree to majority of what's mentioned. So now that you know what, you follow. Because at the end, some brothers sometimes they get confused or they take too long to decide. You know where to begin, go. Because you don't want to delay yourself. And it's also good to take from the one who you trust. Someone trustworthy. Naam, inshallah. Yes.
At my age, we cannot get Al-Ilm. How do you advise us?
Even if someone is old age, no one is young, too old to learn. So some may say, I'm very old, but it's a good question. Alhamdulillah, Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, they came to Islam very old. So what they did, they started at the beginning. So even if you're old, you should not say, my time is up. Rather, what you do is you do what everybody's doing. We come together like this. One lesson, and we keep going. And subhanAllah, maybe next time we'll mention some of the ulama who started very old. So as I encourage him, because sometimes people, they discourage themselves. Inshallah, we'll end with this much. Subhanakallahum bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.